Welcome to Warrior Money, where we're all about uplifting our brother and sister veterans in the business world. I'm Patrick Murphy.
And I'm Dan Coons.
Our guest today is Managing Director of Global Citizenship and Corporate Responsibility at Edelman. Please welcome John D. Edelman. John, welcome to Warrior Money.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
So, largest PR company in the world, 5,800 employees worldwide, but founded by Daniel Edelman, your father. Tell us about him.
Well, my father was a World War II veteran who successfully transitioned from military to set up Edelman, the global communications firm. And I'm honored to be here to talk about the survey, but also as I was preparing for the survey, I looked at some of my father's writings, as there was a book about him. We put a museum together, and I found in his own personal writing that in December 1942, 82 years ago, my dad signed up to be a member of the Army. So the world works in mysterious ways, and so I feel like my father is present as we talk about the survey and his experience. But he was in the World War II, and he started in the Army, and he was at Fort Jackson. He was in the mobile broadcast unit that got transferred to London. And then over the years in his role, he became psychological warfare, where he was analyzing all the publications and propaganda from the German newspapers and writing that he translated. But after London, he got transferred to Verdun, and then he served during the Battle of the Bulge. And then at the close of his military career, he helped, it was the Information Control Division. They closed down some of the German media, make sure they weren't Nazis. Yeah. And then he covered the Nuremberg trial before he came back. And then he worked at CBS that eventually led him to become PR director for Musicraft Records, and then he set up the Tony Company. So he used his skill sets from his public relations to set up Edelman, the communications firm, in 1952 after he had served as the PR director for the Tony Company, bringing communications to brands to tell the story about the brands.
Well, we're going to dive into his story and entrepreneurship, but before I get there, let me just go bluff. Bottom line up front. What does corporate America need to know about the American veteran?
American veterans are incredible talent pipeline. They're strategic assets that are key leaders that employers should be hiring today. They bring their amazing knowledge and experience and skill sets and their ability to problem solve and make things happen. And that was the whole purpose of the survey. As I got into veteran employment after the passing of my father in 2013, I constantly ran into these misperceptions about the veterans being perceived as heroes rather than strategic assets. And that was the whole reason for the survey that we've continued to do.
Yeah. And let me, real quick, first off, Dan and I are both Army veterans. So, your father's part of the greatest generation, the World War II veterans. We're losing about 300 a day of that generation. And even look at the Vietnam generation. I'm named after a Vietnam veteran who gave the ultimate sacrifice. His name was Patrick Ward, and my dad served during Vietnam. My two uncles served in Vietnam, and your uncles also served, right?
Yeah, my uncles served, and in 1942, as I said, my dad signed up to be in the Army. And he had completed his education. He was working at a Poughkeepsie newspaper, but both of my uncles also served in the Army as well.
Let's dive into this Veterans Wellbeing Survey real quick. He did it 6 years ago, and then it just came back out. So tell us about the Veterans Wellbeing Survey.
Okay. Well, this is actually our fourth iteration. We started it in 2014, and the key driver was, as I was starting to get more involved in the veteran employment, I kept on learning about these misperceptions about that 6 in 10 of the respondents. It's a unique survey because we survey across veterans, non-veterans, employers, corporate partners. And so what the survey shows is that there's this perception that veterans are are heroes as opposed to strategic assets. But what was even more relevant is, and even 6 years later, we put it on pause because of COVID, but even 6 years later, there's still this misperception that the respondents across these audiences, 6 and 10 again, felt that they were heroes rather than strategic assets, discounting all the incredible skill sets, resiliency, problem solving, making things happen, leadership, team building, all these things that are core skill sets to navigate the complexity of today's world. These are the leaders that people should be leaning to take things forward to help with the complexity.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, because we often, Patrick and I often talk about the difference between like heroes or victims versus strategic assets or civic assets. Can you unpack that just a little bit? What do you actually mean by that, and what do you think we should mean by that in your survey?
Okay, well, the heroes' point of view is really unfortunate. They are heroes, but they are. So what we also found in the survey is that during the military service, they are in the peak. The survey is all about well-being. So it relates to financial well-being, having relationships. And so unpacking it is that the heroes, the 1% of the country, provide the freedoms that we have, but yet when looking to hire them to be leaders at the company, they're not perceived as strategic. There's a total disconnect where you're missing incredible talent that can help make things happen. Strategic assets being leaders who can make things happen, drive the company forward. And so it's a terrible misperception. And the reality is, like you said, that coming out of World War II, a lot of the companies were founded by veterans like my father, whether it's Federal Express or Nike or Walmart, or Sperry, they're all founded by veterans. So these are the leaders who are leading companies and taking things forward across many sectors. And that's the misperception, that all these leaders are able to establish companies and have successful careers. But there's the disconnect that they're not strategic assets that can make things happen within the organization. And so that is what we mean by strategic assets, that can be leaders to move things ahead and make great progress.
There's better future for you than just the time you served in service.
Right.
And the skills that you were able to gain in service can then transfer into your organizations, and then be civic leaders in that way, in that capacity.
The transfer of the skills,
totally makes sense.
Leaders, resiliency, problem solving, all the strengths that you bring from your experience, and being able to make things happen, problem solve, work through difficult situations, and being able to react. Agility is another important skill set. You have to be able to make decisions and strategize and make scenarios, and all these are important soft skills that make the difference in leading organizations with the complexity of the world today.
Yeah, I think the numbers speak to themselves. I mean, you surveyed over 5,000 folks, but 38% of veterans don't see themselves as heroes, or see themselves as heroes, but 68% of the civilian population thinks veterans are heroes. But the disconnect is, but they're also civic assets. They're strategic assets that can be utilized by these teams if they fall back within these corporate ranks, and especially if they find that purpose.
Yeah, let's talk. One of the important findings in the survey that's very revealing is that we did a graph of sort of a lifestyle, and we found in the survey, which was very revealing, that in the active duty time, the veterans feel at the strongest. That their lives they have purpose. They have a team. They have battle buddies. And after the military service, it goes down, which is very unfortunate. And some of the explanation comes out in the survey, where if you're in a job, there's a differentiation coming out of the job, like coming right out of the military. 52% of those surveyed, the veterans, they don't feel they're hired at the field that they want, and 64 are at the level they want. So that's coming right out of the military. But so that the great difference maker is that there's in that time frame, they feel they have purpose, they have a team, but when they come down, there's disappointment, because in trying to figure that out, because the survey points to some of those things, but I also did some additional research. I talked to the Road Home, which is a program that works with treating veterans with suffering from wounds of war and their families, and talked to Brian Clausen, because I'm on our advisory board there, and he said there's a big coming out of the military where you have a team, you have battle buddies, you're purpose-driven, and you come back and there's disappointment because everybody's individualistic. You don't have the team, you don't have the comradeship. So that's part of the disconnect where the veterans feel, that they lack purpose, they lack mission. So one is that disappointment thing that Brian talked about, but the other is that when veterans are brought into a role, of all the audiences surveyed, only 47% felt of the veterans felt that their skills were being used effectively.
Yeah.
In contrast, non-veterans, 64% feel their skills are being used effectively. So again, you have this consistent disconnect where, going back to your first question, that the veterans are strategic assets. They bring their skill sets and leadership and resiliency and problem solving to benefit the company and the company's team members, and yet there's the disconnect in when they are in their job, that the employers are not acknowledging it, or they're saying you need additional skills, you need additional experience, which may be true, but the soft skills are what makes the difference these days: leadership, problem solving, resiliency, all the ones that the veterans have shared, and the veterans that currently are working at our firm, at other companies across the country. This is an incredible resource that needs to be tapped into more by employers.
Yeah, so we're going to get to that point. We're going to dive into it a little bit more. We'll be right back with John Edelman. Welcome back to Warrior Money. We're joined by John Edelman. John, it was 6 years ago, the last Veterans Wellbeing Survey. 60% then of veterans said their well-being was good or excellent. Since 6 years ago, a lot has happened in our community. We've had COVID. We had the Mission Act of 2018. We've had the pullout of the Afghanistan war. The longest wars in American history have now ended. And so now, when you just came back with the survey results that just came out this month, you're looking at it, it's only 47% of our brother and sister veterans have good or excellent well-being. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, I think part of it relates to what I shared earlier, is that when veterans are in a role, they feel their skills are underutilized. And the other thing is that the survey is well-being holistically. It's holding a job, having relationships, having a financial stability, and so all those relate to coming back to the well-being. But the other thing that Brian mentioned to me, going back to my conversation with him, is that a lot of them, like the post 9/11, they're now aging and they're having more chronic pain and more other illnesses that are popping up. So that's another aspect that would contribute to it. But I think the biggest sort of disconnect, there's a lot of disconnects, but one that's really shocking and really disappointing is that only 20% of the veterans believe that the public understands the sacrifices that they and their families go through to serve the country, and the 1% that allows the freedoms that we are able to experience. That is totally shocking and disappointing, that they're out there providing safety for us and security, but yet the public coming back doesn't recognize the sacrifice and the contribution that they're making. So that's a total another disconnect. And as you referenced, that this military civilian divide is getting deeper and deeper because people like my father who died 10 years ago, that, and you referenced this earlier, that age group is dying out, and people that were close, like a lot of people, like we have an employee resource group, and a lot of people like me didn't serve, but they had uncles, fathers who served, and now all that generation is dying out.
No doubt.
So there's not that closeness of proximity. So all these things are adding, to the disappointment and the well-being, the lower well-being across of the veterans, unfortunately, in the past 6 years.
Can I ask real quick on the survey itself? When you asked over 1,000 employers in corporate America, et cetera, have you tried to hire veterans? 87%, according to your survey, said, "Hey, we try to hire veterans." What are some of the best practices? Who do you partner with? I know I just heard you speak at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Hiring Heroes Foundation, but who else or who's doing good things, and what would you suggest?
Okay, that's a great question because one of the other interesting things in the survey is that I referenced earlier that coming right out of service, there's this big dip, that the skills aren't being used, and that clearly came out, as I said earlier, that 52% don't feel that they're at a level or at 60 a field that they want to be in. But after 5 years or more, 7 of 10 are in jobs that they're enjoying in a desired field. So the clear disconnect is the transition programs. And the survey also reflected, as we share at the Chamber of Commerce Hiring Heroes event, that if you have a program like SkillBridge, it provides a strong bridge because out of the SkillBridge, as we know, 85% of veterans and 85% of mil-spouse who also are in a program like that get job offers.
Yeah.
So a SkillBridge or a vet tech type program, so there's a clear opportunity here to do better with transition. And the one that really would make a difference, but one that people are using currently, which also is a shock, the internships and apprenticeships. We found that, while going back to 84% of corporations felt that they would benefit from having an internship, only 1 in 3 corporations actually have internships and apprenticeship programs. So there's, again, another disconnect. So that, along with having a very good employer resource group, to provide support. Another best practice that we hear at these Hiring Our Hero sessions is that you have a mentor who's a veteran, but you also have a mentor who's a senior leader. So that all helps. You also create a veteran-friendly workplace, welcoming. So all these are some of the best practices that can be.
And real quick for our listeners that might not know, SkillBridge is when you're in active service and you can go basically to tryout. So you get hired by a company, a corporation for 1, 2, 3 months. You're still under the payroll of the Department of Defense, but then, that company's trying out and you may or may not stay with them. It's tryout for both sides to see if you like it. Okay.
No, there's so much there's so much to unpack in what we've talked about so far and the conversations that we're having. And the part that I'm really interested in is the names you've all referenced already. So Nike, Walmart, FedEx, these organizations were all based on entrepreneurship, and they were all based on somebody your dad coming back and starting something, right? The survey also talked a little bit about interest in entrepreneurship and interest in access to capital and the ability to build and generate your own business. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your perspective on entrepreneurship for veterans. And then I also have a secondary question, which is like, ERG is great for massive multinational corporations. But if I'm a trucking company in Iowa or a small company someplace else, you may not have those sorts of resources to be able to support the transitioning veteran. So the first question is about entrepreneurship and how do we enable that, and what do you think about that? The second question is how do we get transitioning service members to be better supported when they go back home? And then I've got a follow-up question about that because 73% of veterans come from specific areas. There's a whole thing that's going on now because of the civilian military divide.
Okay, well, entrepreneurship, because we had some very interesting numbers in entrepreneurship that 47% of veterans said they'd like to become an entrepreneur and pursue that, but only 16% actually did that. And part of the explanation, and the reason they did it, which could tie back to this disconnect, is that 60% felt that they could be their own boss, they'd have a sense of purpose. But one of the big barriers is also 62%, so they don't have access to the capital to do that. But I think entrepreneurship is a very key opportunity, and we need to provide resources and programs that support that.
Yeah, I work with the numbers for the second part. 50% of your dad's generation from World War II start their own small business, create those iconic global brands. But our generation of Iraq, Afghanistan veterans, it's less than 5% actually started. 16% express interest, but it's less than 5%. And that's why Dan and I are venture capital partners. We invest in veteran-owned companies, et cetera. But how about that second part about what can companies do, even if they're a small company, about best practices?
Well, I think trying to get engaged with all the veteran organizations, because there's incredible programs out there like Hiring Our Heroes. Because the other thing that I've learned being in the space is that if you're a veteran-owned company, you hire your veterans. So I think and there are support programs, for those types of things. So I think that, there are resources that are available, and I think that those would be some good steps, is to sort of get involved and be proactive in reaching out, because there's very, very strong organizations.
Yeah, we keep talking about this, like bridging the gap in the sea of goodwill and the ability to get to where people actually are. And I think that's why this program's so important, is because this program with Yahoo Finance to get where people are and hopefully communicate with them in a way that helps these transitions.
I think we have time for what we call Fast and Furious. It's called the Warrior Q&A, John. We're going to ask you, it's like the speed round. This is Dan's job. So we're going to ask you 3 or 4 questions.
I think I know this. I don't think I know this one, but who's a warrior that inspires you?
My father, because he successfully transferred his skill sets, taking the opportunity of the big break to really build it into Edelman to become the global company that we've become.
Great. And what are the habits that help you achieve success?
I think what I've learned is you have to have a big picture with goals. And whenever I try to make a policy, or I say, this is a stretch goal, that this is something that's low-hanging fruit. So I come with 3 or 4 ideas, and I present them all. And if I get 1 or 2 across the finish line, then that helps build progress and incremental success.
You talked about this already, but for your dad, what were the skills that he transferred from the military into business to help him be successful? I
think his ability to work well with people, to be a leader. I mean, to be a risk taker. He was at a firm that he was the PR director for the Tony Company. He felt the entrepreneur. I think there's a business here to provide communications and public relations support for other brands. So he took the risk to set up Edelman, and I think just his hard work ethic really important, and just his commitment to the mission, basically to be like he said, it's great to be the biggest PR firm. We want to be the best PR firm.
What's some business advice that you know now that you wish you knew earlier?
That's a great question. I think the biggest is to just sort of have long-term horizons. Think long-term rather than short-term.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Hey, John, thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate it on Warrior Money. That's our show. So listen, subscribe, review Warrior Money on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcast. And find us at Yahoo Finance. I'm Patrick Murphy.
And I'm Dan Coons. We'll see you next week.